In May of 1971, in Sumas, Washington, right after school had let out, two friends, Logan Eberle and Rick Perkins, both age 14, decided one morning to go fishing on a river they'd never been before. Along the way, they stumbled upon something strange, but it's what they found at the base of it that changed the course of both their lives. This is the unbelievable story Logan told his parents. At first, he told them he'd only gotten lost, but several months later, he finally revealed the details of what really took place. What I'm about to tell you is going to be hard to believe, but I'll take you there myself if you want. As you know, over the past few years, Rick and me explored several of the canyons around here, but there was one we wanted to try because the river coming out of it always had a lot of fish, and we'd never gone further than the mouth of the canyon. It was a long bike ride there, but we didn't care, as we liked adventuring to new places. The day we decided to go there, Rick came by early, before you guys woke up, because we knew we'd be gone all day. Before heading there, we stopped by the market to grab some sandwiches and drinks. We then spent the next hour pedaling there and knew we'd have to hike in because there were no trails or roads up the canyon. I remember feeling excited as we laid our bikes down, grabbed our gear, and started walking along the river. We didn't have anywhere specific we wanted to go. We were just looking for good fishing holes that held a lot of trout. We'd been fishing up the river for about 2 hours when Rick noticed a strange looking stone halfway up the hill to the right of us. We set our gear down and decided to hike up to it to have a closer look. When we got within a few feet, it was easy to see it was not natural. It looked like some type of monument. It was wide and flat, almost like a bed, with a sharp, protruding rock coming up that looked like the shape of a cone. It's what was sitting at the base of the protruding rock, though, that had us curious. It was a glass vial filled with some type of yellow liquid. The covering on top of the vial was odd, and now I think about it, it looked just like human skin. He was the first one to reach out and touch it. "Man, what the hell is that? It's weird and soft," he said, poking it with his finger. He then grabbed it, looking at it more closely. "I don't know, but it's weird. It'd be all the way out here in the middle of nowhere," I replied. He removed the skin looking top and smelled it. "It smells sweet," he said, handing it to me to take a whiff. "Yeah, it does. Smells really good," I replied. Right as I said that, I remember getting an overwhelming urge to drink it. Rick must have gotten the same urge because without saying anything, he grabbed it from me, took a swig, then handed it back. "Damn, that tastes good. Drink it," he said. I must not have been thinking clearly, as I didn't even hesitate drinking it as well. It was unlike anything I'd ever tasted. I can't even describe it. After setting the vial down, I looked over at Rick, who was in the process of laying down. I lay down as well, gazing up at the sky. Sometime later, I was awakened to a fly landing on my face as I brushed it away with my hand. When I sat up, I could see it was late afternoon and Rick was still out. I also noticed both of us had vomited, which alarmed me somewhat. I reached over, grabbed his leg, and said, "Hey man, wake up." Whatever that drink was, it made us sleep and throw up. "We've been out for a while. It's afternoon already." "What are you talking about?" he replied, sitting up. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the vomit was moving slightly. I rubbed my eyes, making sure I wasn't seeing things, checked several times, and it really was. What was even more strange was the vial was gone. I looked all around, but it had definitely vanished or was taken. I stood up, grabbed his arm, trying to get him to leave. "Let's get out of here, man. Something weird is going on," I said. He finally stood up and looked down, noticing what had happened. "Dude, we threw up. What happened?" he asked. "I know, I told you," I replied. We staggered down the hill towards our gear, then followed the river back down the canyon. Neither of us said much until we reached our bikes and started the journey home. On the ride home, we went back and forth over what we thought was in the vial, and what we were even thinking by drinking it. We also wondered about the vomit, and why we'd passed out, as it seemed like several hours. The following day, when we met up, we quickly decided to go back to the stone monument, as we both had an overwhelming yearning to go, almost like we couldn't control it. I don't think we even brought our fishing gear that morning, and looking back, the bike ride and hike along the river was kind of a blur. When we saw the monument from the river, we ran up the hill as fast as we could. Once there, what we saw laying there left us both dumbfounded. There, in the exact spots we'd thrown up, were the bodies of two small people, about half the size of us, both without their skins. My first thought was, what are these things and where did they come from? Suddenly, Rick started freaking out and incoherently mumbling. Rick, are you okay? I asked, putting my hand on his shoulder. By the time I reached the river, he was much further ahead of me. I was out of breath and didn't want to run anymore, so I slowed down to a walk and figured he'd wait for me once he reached the bikes. The hike out seemed longer than usual, and maybe it's because I didn't have Rick to talk to. We always had deep conversations, so it made the time fly. Once the bikes came into view, I could see him sitting close by, next to a bush, his knees up and his head down. It was obvious he was deep in thought. Man, what happened to you up there? I asked when I got within talking distance. It took him several minutes before he looked at me and replied, I can't believe what we just saw. Was that real? I'm afraid it was. Did you notice they were in the same spots we threw up? I asked. He said nothing, just went back to staring at the ground. It was clear he was really rattled. On the ride home, we talked about whether or not to say anything to anyone, and decided we'd come back tomorrow, and if the bodies were still there, then we would. Laying in bed that night, I had the hardest time falling asleep, because images of the bodies wouldn't leave my mind, and Rick losing it like he did was something I'd never seen before. His face was the last thing going through my mind before being startled awake and shouting out loud, because right above me, next to my bed, was a figure standing there. I tried adjusting my eyes to see who it was, but couldn't before he swung at me with something, knocking me out cold. Sometime later, I woke up in the dark, laying face down in the dirt with my hands and feet tied. I could hear the murmuring of people somewhere but couldn't make out what they were saying. I thought about calling out, but figured it was them who'd brought me here, so I kept my mouth shut. A while later, I heard the creak of a door, then footsteps coming down some wooden steps, then a click sound as a dimly lit light came on. My face happened to be turned in the opposite direction, so I couldn't see who was coming up behind me. It wasn't until they grabbed me, flipping me over, I was taken aback. To my surprise and dismay, there stood Rick, looking down at me. I was speechless as he glared at me, like he didn't even know who I was. He backed up a bit and just stood there, like he was waiting for something. I had a million questions, but couldn't utter a word. I couldn't fathom my best friend would be doing this to me. I heard more footsteps and watched what looked like a wooden cane come into view as a small, decrepit old lady with long silver hair slowly came around the corner. She walked over to Rick, put her hand on his shoulder, and whispered in his ear. He nodded his head, turned, and left. She then hobbled over to a chair that was in the middle of the room and sat down. Looking around, I could see I was most likely in a cellar. As my gaze went over to her, I noticed she was staring at me as she held her cane with both hands. I couldn't really see her face because her messy hair was covering most of it. We stared at each other in silence for what seemed like an eternity before I heard several sets of footsteps coming down the stairs. Who I saw as I turned the corner is something I still can't believe to this day. It took me a bit to fully realize who it was because it was not possible. There, alongside Rick, was me. At least someone who looked exactly like me. They came and stood behind the old lady, not saying anything. This can't be. Just what in the hell is going on? I thought to myself. After some time, the old lady motioned them to come close and whispered something to them. They nodded their heads, turned, and walked out of sight. The old lady stood up and slowly walked over to me. As she knelt down and got really close, I could see the look of crazy and evil in her eyes. The look of hate she had was pure dread for me. I suddenly caught movement behind her as I watched Rick quietly getting closer. Something was off, though. His clothes were different, and his hair was not the same as the Rick I'd just seen. I could see his arm raised and a metal pipe in his hands. I tried not looking at him for fear she'd notice when suddenly he swung, hitting her on the side of the head with a loud thud. She collapsed on me in a heap as a horrible smell of her hit my nose. He quickly pushed her off and began untying my hands. Man, what's going on? I whispered to him. I don't know, but did you see the two guys that looked just like us? I think they were coming back for me, but I was able to escape before they came, he replied. Where are we? I asked. I don't know. It's dark outside, but it looks like we're on a farm in the woods somewhere. Hurry, get up. We need to get out of here before they come back, he replied in a panicked tone. My arms and legs were numb as I tried my best to stand. He took notice and helped me up as we stumbled our way over to the stairs. As we made our way up each step, I kept glancing at the door. Going up those stairs was the most frightened I'd ever been, as I was fully expecting to see the door swing open and those two imposters, or whatever they were, standing there. Once we made it to the top and swung the door open, it was dark, but I could still see a house and barn. The barn had a light on inside and assumed that's where they were. Let's head this way, I whispered, which of course was the opposite direction. By that time, I was getting feeling back into my legs and was able to move faster, so we started jogging. We had no idea where we were or where we were going. We just wanted to get as far away as possible. I took one last look at the barn before heading into the thick trees and saw both of them standing there, just outside the door watching us. Hurry, they've spotted us, I yelled to him as we picked up the pace. As we ran through the woods, I thought for sure they had to be chasing us, so I put all my focus and effort into running as fast as I could. It wasn't until I had no choice but to stop and catch my breath did I realize I'd gotten way ahead of Rick and actually lost him. I looked all around, but he was nowhere in sight. I whispered loudly to him several times. There was no response, only the eerie silence of the forest. Panic shot through me as I asked myself whether or not I should try finding him, but ultimately decided to just hunker down. I knew I most likely wouldn't find him as the forest was thick, and stumbling into the two things chasing us was not something I wanted. I crouched behind a fallen log that was nearby and peered through an opening I could barely see through, hoping he'd show up. I was starting to doze off when suddenly I was jolted awake to the echoes of someone shrieking. I could have sworn it was him, but there was no way to know for sure. My legs were hurting, so I started shifting positions to get more comfortable when I heard the sound of twigs snapping in front of me. I instantly froze, lowered my head so I could peer through the opening, and could faintly see someone walking in my direction. At first, I couldn't make out who it was, but as they got closer, I could see his face. It was me, the thing that looked like me at least. I clenched up as he got really close, ready to jump and run if he found me. When he got about 5 feet from me, he suddenly stopped for some reason and looked around. I held my breath, making sure I didn't make a sound. He then started making strange noises I can't even begin to describe, the creepiest sounds I'd ever heard. I was almost at my breaking point where I couldn't hold my breath any longer when he turned and walked off. I knew I had to wait a while longer before moving, so about an hour later I quietly stood up and went in the opposite direction of him. Again, I had no idea where I was or where I was going, but any direction away from him was fine with me. When morning finally came, I climbed to the top of a hill and could see a small town in the distance. I spent the next several hours making my way there and knocked on the first house I came to. I was shocked to hear the owner say I was in Canada. I know we live right next to the border, but I never imagined I went as far as I did. What was even more shocking was when I found out Rick made it home before me. The day after I'd gotten home, I went to talk to him about what had happened, wanting to ask him how he made it back, but he didn't want to discuss it, and acted odd the entire time. As I left his house and got on my bike, I turned back to see him glaring at me from the porch, and the thought went through my head, is that really Rick? I spent the next week building up enough courage to go back to the stone monument to see if it was still there, or if I'd just imagined everything. As I was hiking up to it from the river, Rick suddenly appeared on top of the hill, just above it. I stopped and we looked at each other for the longest time, before I decided to leave, and haven't seen him since. Logan's parents tried locating the farm he talked about, but were never able to find it. They did find the stone monument, but it was unexplainable how it got back in as far as it was. It's quite large and obviously extremely heavy, which would require machinery to move it. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.